The ring hit the marble floor of the restaurant and spun in a slow, mocking circle before it came to rest at his feet, and every single head in that Savannah dining room turned to watch a grown man kneel down and pick up his own broken heart. Abigail Marsh stood over him with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, certain she was making the smartest decision of her life. She had no idea that in exactly 4 days, the man she had just humiliated in front of 30 strangers would be standing at the head of a conference table, holding her job, her future, and her entire company in the palm of his hand. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that kindness always finds its way back to the people who deserve it, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a reminder that love isn't about a price tag, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's go back to where it all began. Abigail was 29 years old, sharp as a tack, and climbing the corporate ladder at Hartwell Marketing Group faster than anyone in the Savannah office had climbed it before her. She had grown up watching her mother stretch grocery money until it screamed, watching her father work 2 jobs and still come home apologizing for what he couldn't give. Poverty had left a scar on Abigail that never fully healed, and somewhere along the way, without really meaning to, she had built her entire sense of safety around one single rule: never again. She told herself she wasn't shallow. She told herself she simply wanted stability, a partner who could stand beside her instead of leaning on her. But underneath that careful reasoning was a frightened little girl who equated love with a bank balance, and she had never done the work to untangle the two. Theodore Lane came into her life on an ordinary Tuesday, soaked from the rain, apologizing for bumping into her outside a coffee shop on Broughton Street. He had kind eyes, calloused hands, and a gentleness in the way he spoke that made Abigail feel, for the first time in years, like she could exhale. He told her he worked in logistics, which was true, though he left out the part where the company bore his own name on the building. He wore a plain watch, drove a 10-year-old truck, and lived in a modest rental house with his 8-year-old daughter, Josephine, whose mother had passed away 3 years earlier from an illness that took her far too soon. Theodore wasn't hiding his wealth out of some game or manipulation. He simply wanted, for once, to be loved for the man he was and not the number attached to his name, because he had been burned before by people who saw dollar signs before they saw his face. For 8 months, Abigail and Theodore built something that felt real. He showed up to her sister's baby shower with flowers he'd picked himself. He remembered that she took her coffee with oat milk and exactly 1 pump of vanilla. He sat on the floor of his living room with Josephine doing homework while Abigail cooked dinner in his small kitchen, and in those quiet, ordinary evenings, Abigail felt a peace she had never known in any relationship before. Josephine started calling her Miss Abby, and once, in a moment that nearly broke Abigail's heart with tenderness, the little girl asked if Abigail would come to her school's father-daughter dance since her own mother couldn't be there and Abigail was, in Josephine's words, close enough to family. But love has a way of testing the walls we've built around our wounds, and Abigail's wall was about to be tested in the cruelest possible way. It happened at her cousin's engagement dinner, a lavish affair at one of Savannah's finest restaurants, filled with lawyers, doctors, and old money families who measured worth in wristwatches and wine vintages. Theodore had proposed to Abigail 2 weeks earlier in the quiet of his backyard, with Josephine hiding behind a tree filming it on an old phone, and Abigail had said yes with tears streaming down her face. She wore the ring proudly that night, a modest but beautiful piece Theodore had chosen with real thought, not real flash. But surrounded by diamonds the size of marbles and conversations about summer homes in Hilton Head, something ugly began to stir in Abigail. Her aunt leaned over and asked, loud enough for the table to hear, what exactly Theodore did for a living, and when Abigail answered honestly that he worked in logistics and ran a small operation, the table exchanged glances that made her stomach twist with a shame she thought she'd buried years ago. Someone made a joke about settling. Someone else asked if she thought about her future, about children, about security. The old fear rose in Abigail's chest like floodwater breaking through a dam, and instead of standing up for the man who had shown her nothing but steady, quiet devotion, she let the fear win. She stood up in front of everyone, slid the ring from her finger with trembling hands, and told Theodore that she couldn't do this, that she needed someone who could actually build a life with her, that she was sorry but she refused to struggle the way her parents had struggled. The ring dropped to the floor. The restaurant went silent except for the soft, devastating sound of Theodore picking it up off the marble, brushing it against his sleeve, and slipping it quietly into his jacket pocket without a single word of anger, only a look of profound, aching disappointment that would haunt Abigail for the rest of her life. 4 days later, Abigail walked into Hartwell Marketing Group for an emergency all-staff meeting, still nursing the raw wound of a breakup she had caused and already regretted more than anything she'd ever done. Rumors had been swirling for weeks about an acquisition, about new leadership coming in to restructure the company. Abigail took her seat, still numb, still replaying that restaurant scene on a loop in her mind, and when the conference room doors opened, her entire world tilted sideways. Theodore Lane walked in wearing a tailored charcoal suit, flanked by 2 attorneys, and stood at the head of the table where the CEO usually sat. He introduced himself, calmly and professionally, as the majority owner of Lane Holdings, the parent company that had just acquired Hartwell Marketing Group 3 months prior, an acquisition he had kept private while he quietly observed the company culture from the outside before ever setting foot inside as its new leader. He had never lied to Abigail about who he was. He had simply waited for her to fall in love with the man before the empire, because that was the only kind of love he trusted anymore. Abigail sat frozen in her chair, the blood draining from her face, as her coworkers whispered around her, piecing together what she already understood with sickening clarity. The poor single father she had rejected in front of a room full of judgmental strangers now controlled her paycheck, her career, her entire professional future, and worse, she had lost him not because of anything he had done, but because of who she had let herself become in that one terrible moment of weakness. She didn't approach him that day, or the next. Instead, she wrote him a letter by hand the old-fashioned way, because some apologies are too important to be typed. She wrote about her childhood, about the fear that had shaped her into someone who confused love with security, about the shame she felt watching herself do to him exactly what she had feared her whole life would be done to her. She didn't ask for the company, or forgiveness, or even a second chance. She simply asked him to know that Josephine's kindness and his quiet steadiness had taught her more about real wealth in 8 months than 29 years of chasing status ever had. Theodore didn't answer the letter for 3 weeks. When he finally did, it wasn't with words, but with a small package left on her desk containing the very ring she had thrown away, along with a note that said some people spend their whole lives building empires and forget to build a home, and he had simply been looking for someone willing to build one with him, poor or rich, it never mattered. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that real love has nothing to do with money and everything to do with character, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below, because your support is what keeps these stories alive. And before we go, I want to ask you something important. Comment the word Abigail below if you believe people deserve a second chance when they finally learn from their mistakes, and comment the word Theodore if you believe true love should never have to prove itself with wealth in the first place. I read every single one of your comments, and they mean more to me than you know. Abigail and Theodore didn't rush back into what they had lost. They started over slowly, carefully, the way you rebuild something you never want to break again, with Sunday dinners at his modest kitchen table, with Josephine's small hands slipping back into Abigail's during evening walks, with honest conversations about fear and money and the kind of love that doesn't flinch when life gets hard. A year later, in that same backyard where he first proposed, Theodore asked Abigail to marry him again, and this time, when she said yes, she understood that the richest thing he had ever given her wasn't a company or a ring, but a chance to become someone worthy of the love that had been standing quietly in front of her all along.